Welcome to episode 113 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Today we're going to be talking about the Photographing Drinks Challenge. So last week I was showing you some of the tips and tricks of photographing some cocktails and mocktails that I did for Nico's Mediterranean Greek restaurant just down the road. And from that I decided to do a drinks photography challenge. We've had 11 people put in images for that. Now, kind of before we get too much underway, one of the things I'm going to have to show you is, well, I'll tell you, is that right now, as we speak, outside the window is the British Touring Cycling Championship thing going on. And it is literally, if I just show you this photo I took a little bit earlier, as you can see, it's not a particularly pleasant day either, but this is looking one way out the window. So you can see this is the start finish line right here, literally right outside my window. And if I turn and look up the other way, you've got the library there, and you know there's a big screen up here. So this was kind of the sort of setting up, and then periodically we have a whole pile of bikes go shooting past, and there's lots of yelling from the from spectators and from there's a PA system and somebody talking through all the bits and pieces. The men's championship, I took this one just a little bit earlier, just from the window upstairs. So basically they're doing these laps around, which take, I don't know, sort of, they're all at sort of various stages now. So about every 20 minutes or half an hour or something, another set of bikes goes past, and there's all this banging and shouting and noise. And so if you start hearing a lot of noise coming in through the microphone, then my apologies. It's just slightly chaotic today. This happens at this time kind of every year. It's just, of course, this time last year I was still doing, I think, 7:30 in the evening. So yeah, this is the first time I think we've actually had to fully compete with the British touring cycling race thing. So my apologies in advance for that. So anyway, here we are, live YouTube, if you're not watching the recording. Leave me a comment, let me know where you're from, tell me what you're up to, and what the weather's like where you are, because it's really dreek here today. So I can see we've got a few comments in already, so let's take a look and see what we've got here. So Jacqui is here for saying hello from South Africa. Pat is saying hi everyone from a sunny and breezy Somerset. Melissa is saying hi from North Carolina. Mai-Britt is saying hello from Copenhagen. It is hot. Oh gosh, oh, it's certainly not here. Jim says, hi everyone from a damp and windy Dumfries. Yes, it's a damp and windy Castle Douglas too. Hope you're recovering from COVID, Kim. Yeah, kind of past the worst of it. To be honest, a little bit low on energy. I've just had a coffee, as I usually do, just before I start these. So at the moment, I'm just coming up on it and I'm bright and bubbly. So that masks everything beautifully for the sake of the podcast. What it does mean, though, is in about an hour and a quarter to an hour and a half, I'm probably going to crash, but hopefully we will have finished the podcast by then. What else we got? Oh, April says, hello everyone, have a hot and sunny day for my birthday. Well, happy birthday, April. So glad you decided to give up some of your time on your birthday to still tune into the podcast. And there's a whole bunch of happy birthdays for you there from Jacqui, Melissa, and Pat and Mai-Britt, and Meg as well. So, and Stacy. Stacy says, good morning on this sunny Sunday. Will be a balmy 90 degrees this afternoon. And John's here saying, good morning from Columbus, Ohio. A couple more happy birthdays for you. Binod Singh is saying, good evening, everyone. And Viji says, happy birthday, April. Hugs and love. So, excellent. Right. And April saying, thank you, my pleasure. Have a great crowd here. We absolutely have a great crowd here. So that's always fun and good. Right. Okay. So, what was I talking about? Yes, the drinks challenge. So, last week then, we looked at the idea of photographing drinks. Now, I was kind of leaving it really quite wide open as to the idea of what that drink might be. Most people seem to have interpreted it as alcoholic drinks, it has to be said. That's fine, that's okay. I didn't want to specify that it had to be. Well, I mean, I also, for that matter, I usually do this halfway through, but let's start with this bit. I did a question of the week. My question of the week was, I specifically said this time, what is your favourite drink? And for me, I said, really, ultimately, my favourite drink has to be the mocha that I get, which is coffee with with chocolate in it, down at In-House Chocolates, just about 200 yards down the road from here. Many of you will have heard me talk about In-House Chocolates before. It is certainly, because they are a chocolate deli, they are busy making chocolates in the back all the time. So when you get a mocha, what they do is they spoon the melted chocolate out of the bain-marie at the back, pour it into the mug, and then they add the milk. And if you have a coffee, instead of adding the milk, they add the coffee. So you end up with a great big pool of chocolate at the bottom, and then it's your choice as to whether you just want to kind of scoop the chocolate out the bottom or stir it in. Or do a mix, which is kind of what I do. I kind of scoop a bit, mix a bit, scoop a bit, mix a bit. To get the right combination takes a lot of practice, so you have to keep going back there. So that tends to be my favourite drink. Pretty much you get the chocolate and I get the coffee, which, you know, is something I particularly tend to enjoy. It's particularly the up. So what else did we have? So Benedito said his favourite drink was Armagnac. Mai-Britt said gin and tonic. Robert said a Tomintoul Scotch 25-year-old. Now 25-year-old Scotch malt is, yeah, that would be rather lovely. Very expensive, but also very smooth. Somewhere I've got an 18-year-old Glenmorangie, which is rather lovely too. So if you're into single malts, basically the older the better is what you're going for there. Stacy said Zinfandel. Diane said port and lemon. Jacqui said cappuccino, the largest the coffee shop has to offer. Anne also said coffee. Russ said tea. He can't function in the morning until he's at least had one cup. April says a lemonade or pina colada. And Michelle said my favourite hot drink is hot chocolate. My favourite alcoholic drink is Archers and lemonade. And my favourite all-round drink is water. So pretty much going, so a good kind of covering there of alcoholic, non-alcoholic. And I must admit, I do drink water more than I drink anything else. Having realised that, I just realised I've left my glass of water on the other side of the room, so I may have to nip off and grab that in a minute. What else have we got here? Oh, Melissa says she's into mocha as well. Meg says my favourite drink is mocha as well. In fact, actually, just the other day, Meg took me down to In-House Chocolates where we both had mochas as a kind of late Father's Day present. Couldn't do it on Father's Day because I still had the COVID bit, but once I got past the worst of that, we did that. April says that sounds really good. I would love to try that place if I went to Scotland, and certainly if anybody wants to come over to Scotland and come to Castle Douglas, I will absolutely treat you to a hot chocolate or a mocha down at In-House Chocolates. John Harvey says I love a Bloody Caesar, which is Clamato and vodka. Right, I'm not totally sure. I've come across Clamato. You say Clamato, I say Clamato. Okay, so yeah, excellent. So this idea then of photographing drinks. What I said particularly I thought would be a good idea would be the idea essentially becomes kind of photographing glass is really what I wanted to try and push you on, to try and get that sense that glass reflects light and refracts light in a slightly different way than, say, photographing a mug. So this was really the challenge. And we've had 11 people send in images. So what I thought we would do is we'll go through the images. A couple of people have asked for feedback. So we might do a little bit of that as well. So let's make a start then. And the first photo we're going to look at comes from Ines. And Ines said, here's my entry for the photographing drinks challenge. Hopefully I'll catch the live episode. It doesn't look like he's in just yet. I'm not sure if the photo has too much of a brown look, so any advice about that or any other points you might note will be appreciated. So Ines here has got a nice collection of whiskies. featuring a 12-year-old Highland Park at the front, but various other ones kicking around as and it sort of fades as it gets back. He's got a couple of glasses poured out already. And we've got some kind of little twinkly lights in the background, adding a nice little bit of bokeh, which also, some of that is coming through the bottles as well, which is quite a nice effect. A couple of things I would say with this one, Ines, if you're looking for a little bit of feedback, which is the first thing I notice, let's just change that workspace. No, what the timeline thing, there we go, is it's sort of tilting out a bit on the left. Now the problem is if I try and straighten that bottle on the right, the whole lot then tilts over to the right. So it's something of probably using a wide angle lens or something similar. Probably the best thing to do, what you can do with this, is if I just duplicate the layer for a moment, and then in this case I can either go Control T or I will go to Edit Transform or Free Transform, and then what I can do, if I can hold down the Control button on probably a Command button on Apples, but I can then just drag this corner out a bit, and what you can see is, so that way all the other corners are hooked, anchored rather, and I can just pull this one out until we just kind of end up straightening that side a little bit. And if this one looks slightly tilted as well, just pull that out a little bit like that, and there we go. And so we've gone from that to that, and it's kind of managed to sort of straighten it up a little bit, which I think looks quite good. Another thing is you've got the twinkly bits sort of sitting in the middle. I think kind of more spread out across could have been quite interesting. The other bit you asked about was the notion of the colour. You kind of felt that everything kind of looked a little bit too brown, so brown yellow shift. So at this point, maybe what you want to try and do is see what it would look like if you had a sort of slight yellow shift, slight blue shift. Blue and yellow are being on the kind of opposite ends on the computer thing. So if I'll just duplicate that again, and if I go very quickly into Camera Raw with this image, and what we've got up here, I've got a temperature. Let me just move this over a little bit here so you can see the scales, and I can either do an auto, see what that does, and you can see that that's sort of shifted everything over into the blue and over into the purple. If I undo that and maybe just take the blue and just nudge that over a little bit, and so what we're doing is we're kind of making a slight bluer bit on the background. So you can see we've gone from that to that. Now we lose a little bit of the gold in here, but then in a way it kind of works better, because having a sort of slight blue shift in the background really tends to emphasize the gold yellow aspect of the bottles and the whiskey and the table. So just that little nudge, I think, kind of just makes it sort of stand out that little bit more. So certainly worth playing with. If you decided, I mean, another thing we could do here, you could go even further if you wanted, really shift that blue. At this point we have lost some of the colour here, so maybe you would mask that, and then you could sort of paint the gold back in. Now I'm just doing this very, very quickly. It would obviously take a little bit more time, but something like that then that allows you to have a kind of selective blue background, but sort of keep the kind of gold richness of the whiskey in the foreground. So playing around with your colour shifts is certainly something you could be doing. So hope that gives you a few ideas in this. Right, okay, let me click here. Tell you what I'll do, excuse me one sec, and I will just grab my glass of water, which I unfortunately left on the other side of the room. All right. Okay, what else? Oh, Viji says hot chocolate and filter coffee. Well, that's the great thing about mocha, is it's the mix of hot chocolate and coffee. Right, John says first photo up is great. Well done. And April says I like the blue effect, as does Mai-Britt, and so does Stacy. Cool. Okay, let's move on then. So our next image then comes from Stacy, or it's very different. This one's actually got a whole blue tint to it and could maybe be nudged into the yellows a little bit. But let's take a look, see what Stacy says. Stacy says, I tried to bring out the old Hennessy that was part of my father's collection. I do not drink it, but cognac is poured to a taste. I shot the photograph in my backyard, which is supposed to be a quiet place. I did it a soft focus and blurred background to focus on the bottle and the glass. So this then being out in the backyard, it's got a very kind of very, does the blues give it a very cool kind of look. Now, what I would say with this, Stacy, it's a couple of wee things. First of all, is that it's not really quite in focus. I don't know if blur in the background, you've kind of blurred the foreground a little bit too, as well. I think if you are photographing, there's a point here where you've got to make a decision whereby you are either going to focus on the writing and make sure that the writing is really sharp, which is not really, it's not quite sharp enough, so I don't quite know where the focus point was, or you're focusing on the drink, in which case you might sort of focus on the front of the glass here. In this case, I think actually the focusing on the bottle would have worked better. The other slight problem that you have is because the glass is to the front of the bottle, the glass looks really large compared to the bottle, and so tends to dominate. So as one of those things we might sort of end up addressing a couple of times as the afternoon goes on, which is about kind of getting your balance right between the size of objects that you've got. The bigger the object, the more it's dominating the photo. So is the bottle supposed to be supporting the glass, or is the glass supposed to be supporting the bottle, or are they supposed to both be kind of working together? And in this case, it feels like the glass is dominant in size, but it's really the kind of the bottle which is the slightly more interesting part of it. So, and again, there's a little thing here where I would try maybe straightening it up just a fraction. I mean, if I take this and we just use the bottle, looks like it's kind of, and it's not just the bottle. You see, you've got the post in the back here is also leaning slightly to the right. So I'm tempted just to kind of pull that up and just kind of somewhere around, crop that. So that gives you a slight, and then let's just for a moment here take this into camera raw. Like I said, it's very, very blue, this, and if I do an auto, you see that it really shifts it over. Now maybe I don't want to shift it quite as much as that, but I'll tell you what, let's just do that for a moment, and then what I can do is I can change the opacity of the top one and just kind of nudge it over until I find, if that feels a bit too yellow and that feels a bit too blue, then you just kind of nudge it along until you find what you feel kind of sits comfortably. And for me, that's probably somewhere around there. But of course, I will also fully accept that everybody's got different screens that they're looking on, so might prefer to have it shifted slightly one way or the other. So colour thing and making it straight, and then thinking about the dominant side of it. But thanks very much for sending that one in, Stacy. Right, okay. Where are we? Click on that. Here we go. So let's next move up to then, what have we got? Robert. So Robert from Texas sent this one in. She says, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing drunk. Obviously had a bit of fun with this one. And Robert says, this is a photo I took during the lockdown while I was beginning to learn photography. It was for a photo crowd contest. I used to like it. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time to make a new one. Hopefully this one will do. Okay, so Robert's not had time to do a new one, but has so he sort of raided the archives for this. Now this one's going for a slightly different kind of feel, whereby you're quite high looking down, and one of the things it feels to me like this bit isn't quite as in focus, as it looks more focused and sharper down here in the reflection than it actually does on the top. So I think the tricky bit here, Robert, is while I think it's always quite an interesting idea to sort of, you're playing with the angles here, so you're kind of looking down from the top, also giving you more of a sense of the ice in the cup here. The focal point seems to be here. And the focal point doesn't really need to be on the label in the reflection. The focal point should really have been on the label, or sort of maybe around here, so that we get in the glass as well. I think would have worked better. The other thing is that when I click in, and this is very, very noisy. So another one of those things where I think potentially playing around with the camera settings to make sure that you've got a lower ISO, or even in the you kind of try and de-noise it a little bit in the post-production as well. But a kind of fun one to do. Putting the writing in makes it sort of more like a poster. This looks like there's bits of reflections going on down here, which I'm not totally sure of. In fact, even looks like you've maybe tried sort of painting out something here. Let me just open that a moment. If I take the curves and drag that up like that, and then we zoom in, you get a better sense of, didn't mean to do that. Yeah, when we look down here, there's these kind of funny markings that we've got here. Looks like you were trying to sort of paint out what was reflected here, except you only did it roughly. So I think there's nice potential in this. It's just the little things, really. You want to make sure that you've got a better ISO, that if you are going to paint out the reflection, you know, something that's reflecting here, you don't want to, that you take a little bit more time to do it. Again, and this little trick here, if you're not sure, when it's quite dark and you can't always see, is to take a curves level and just drag it up, just brighten everything for a moment. This isn't affecting it, because you can take it off afterwards, but it does at the least give you a sense of what's going on, and you can see whether you've maybe managed to get rid of the bits you didn't want to, or you wanted to rather. So yeah, but yeah, bit of fun, put a smile on my face. So thanks for sending that one through, Robert. Okay. What's this? Viji says, somehow the golden colour, or is it the amber, looks beautiful in the glass. All three photographs so far are beautiful. So, yeah, so Viji, essentially, it is one of those kind of classic things when you've got whiskey, or you've got Armagnac, or you've got certainly one of these kind of rich, as you say, amber, golden kind of liquids in a glass. It does have a, you know, it can work really well if you can get the light right to play with. We have another one of these comes up next with Michele. So click through to here, and now Michele has gone for Baileys. Now there's nothing actually in the glass this time, rather it's a Baileys glass, and then she's got little bottles of Baileys. Now I think Pat said something about, you know, a huge glass, but these are miniature Baileys. So Michele said, my submission for the drinks challenge, I was just adding to my still life collection. So playing around with this. So I think this is quite nice lighting. It's kind of soft. We can see what it is. Now, the tricky thing here, Michele, part of it is, you know, again, I'm kind of feeling like, is it just the way angle I'm sitting at? I don't know. Although I know your level with the top of the glass, it still feels like it's tilted slightly, and I want to tilt it about half a degree to the left, or anti-clockwise, just to kind of straighten that up. And the other problem that we have, and this is something that we all kind of need to be aware of when we're taking photos, especially close-up photos, if we're using a macro lens or we're just zooming right in, which is that a good camera these days and good digital photography, we pick up detail. We might be picking up unwanted detail. And what I couldn't help but notice with this is it's very dusty. It's a terrible thing, but you can actually see quite a lot of dust on this glass, and on bits of the bottles. And the light, it's a terrible thing. When you're photographing glass, thumbprints, smudges, dust, everything just gets absolutely magnified and picked up in a way that perhaps the old analog cameras might not have, unless, you know, digital can be very unforgiving sometimes. And also the other bit is if you find that in your post-processing you are sharpening up your picture as well, that can particularly tend to amplify the bits of dust. So I think I think the idea is good, Michele. I think, you know, it's nicely executed the way you've lit it and laid it out. But I think that is one of those problems there with all the bits of dust in there. I've got caught out with this before. This is why I kind of noticed it and why I'm bringing it up, is because it's done too easily. Whenever you are photographing glass, like I say, it is completely and utterly unforgiving. So you kind of need to watch out for that. But yeah, a fun one. And Baileys, yeah, I do like a Baileys. So thanks for sending that one in anyway. Right, John says, I like Bailey's photo despite the dust. And April says, good point, we'll make sure everything is completely clean. Yes. It's true. Oh, again, slightly distracted by this. There's a clown outside the window now. So, yeah, there's a couple of people with red noses and red jackets and bits of clown makeup. It's not a good day for doing the podcast. Right, okay. So next up then, let's take a look at Mai-Britt. So Mai-Britt, we're not talking Scotch now, or whiskey, or Baileys, or the amber liquids. So Mai-Britt's been having a little bit of fun here with light and colour and shadow. And I think, in a way, I think when I was talking about a drinks challenge, there's a lot more that I was thinking. Up until now, we've had more kind of, if you like, the kind of still life with bottles and glasses. This I really quite like. Now, there was a couple of comments people left in the Facebook group as well, which I thought reflected. There's a nice kind of what tends to happen is. I think somebody pointed out that one of the things I've talked before about is the fact that red is one of these colours that just grabs the attention. It's like almost like kind of spot colour. It's if you had the big fad for sort of where everything's black and white, but you just leave something red. You kind of never need to do that because red does it anyway. It just draws the attention. It grabs your attention. Now we've got two, as well as the pink of the glass, we've got two chunks of red here. We've got the raspberry hanging over the top, but we've got this large strawberry down here. Now the strawberry does kind of add to, it is part of the colour scheme on the one hand. However, what I would say though is because it's sitting down at the bottom of the glass, most of this picture is really about here. This is essentially what the picture is about. This is where the real story is, if you like. We've got the ice, we've got the frost, we've got the bubbles, we've got the fruit, we've got all the bits and pieces. It's a lovely cocktail or mocktail there. And then you've got the shadow, and I rather like that shadow shape over there. This here is sitting down the bottom, and there's quite a gap between the two. And one of the things I talk a lot about is the notion that gaps get exaggerated in photography. And so the gap here feels much bigger than it naturally would be to your own eyesight. And so kind of what happens is rather than this just being an afterthought, it's sort of competing for attention. So we've got the main part of the photo up here, but we've also got this bit here. And rather it being a kind of a support, it's trying to sort of grab the attention as well. We look here and then this strawberry immediately grabs our attention, but that draws us away from the top part. So it's suddenly getting quite noisy again outside. I can see bikes going past and people banging on. So you might be picking up some of this in the back. I've got no idea. I've tried to move the microphone around so it's pointing more directly at me and hopefully picking up less from the outside. Okay, so back to this then. I like the photo, Mai-Britt. I like the idea of the way you're using a bit of extra light. So Mai-Britt also says about this, here's my attempt at a drinks photo. I do not have all the fancy stuff you professional photographers have, soft boxes and the like, but I do have a Godox Speedlight TT685 and it came in very handy. So basically she's got a Speedlight and using it to one side to create the shadow, which is fun. It's a very hard shadow, which kind of works in some ways, but I think it would also be interesting to play with the idea of a softer shadow. And to do that, now you might not have a soft box, but the idea of a soft box is the idea that you are diffusing the light. So we've talked before about the fact that if you have a larger light source, you get a softer, creamier shadow. So what a softbox does then is the light hits a surface, spreads across the whole surface, and instead of having a flash which is this big, you can have a surface which is this big or even bigger. Now, to try and create that if you don't actually have a softbox is maybe a sheet. A sheet can be quite a good idea, or a piece of thin cloth, white cloth or something like that. And if you can hold that or pin that up in front of the flash, between the flash and the subject, then when you fire it, the light will hit the cloth and diffuse. Now, if the cloth is too thick, then obviously you're just going to end up with a thick shadow. It's not actually going to work. So you've got to kind of play around, find a thin piece of cloth, a hanky or something like that. You find may well make quite a bit of difference, but certainly worth playing with. And another one is if you decide to use natural daylight, sometimes you get a window. If you've got the sun coming through the window, hanging a sheet up at the window can create a really beautiful soft creamy light as well. So that's certainly one worth remembering. But when you're using a small hard light, whilst it does give you a nice kind of crisp shadow like this, we can end up with kind of rather sort of burnt, strong hot spots here. However, what has worked in your favour here, by the look of it, is because I think you've probably taken this quite quickly after setting it up, and the ice and what have you, so that we've got that kind of frosting happening on the glass as the glass is cooled, and you get the little dots of condensation, and that's really good. The condensation then helps to stop. That sort of refracts the light a bit more. It stops you ending up with a great big burnt out spot of light. It kind of diffuses that a little bit more. So that's certainly been working in your favour. So all round, Mai-Britt, I think good. Smug points. Yes, I haven't actually mentioned smug points. So smug points for everybody who said something here. But I think particularly here, Mai-Britt, I think you deserve a few smug points for your playing around and creativity with this one. So thanks for sending that one in. Right, where are we at? Okay, April says this photo looks yummy. Viji says, what is the peach coloured drink called? Mai-Britt says it's a coloured tonic. Viji says it looks posh. Stacy says, I hear the drums but not overpowering you. Okay, so yeah, I think that what it is there's barriers outside, and then there's these big boards, and then people are being encouraged to sort of bang on the boards when the cyclists go past. Anyway, Jim says, like it zoomed into the drink and the shadow, and Meg says it looks like a nice refreshing drink. Yeah, again, that kind of coolness, the ice and the frosting on the glass all makes it does look cool and refreshing. Okay, so just a wee reminder that if you are finding these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com is one of the places you can do that. Right. Oh, May says, thanks for the smug points. I will try the sheet thing next time. Yeah, so, excellent. Right, okay. Next up then, we're going to Jim. And Jim, we're back to the amber liquid. We've got the famous grouse. It's a blended scotch, this, rather than a single malt. And it's a mostly empty bottle. There's more out of the bottle than there is in the glass. So obviously it's glass was previously opened. St Andrew's Clubhouse glass on that. So St Andrew's, one of the homes of golf in Scotland. Yeah, and then we've got a drink measure at the back here. And Jim says, my submission for the drinks challenge, my favourite tipple. Couldn't get rid of the reflections on the bottle, but overall pleased with how it came out. Not sure if the drink measure adds anything. There was an awkward space, so I filled it. Okay, so a couple of things here then. The awkward space, first of all, let's just kind of mention that. Is it an awkward space, or is it kind of how you've decided to balance the photo? I mean, really, if that wasn't there, but this was just sort of pulled in a little bit closer, is it worth opening? Probably not. But essentially, if the edge of the photo was just a little bit further to the left, maybe bring it a little bit to the right, you maybe wouldn't need the measure there. The measure, is it meaning anything? I kind of can be there, might not be there. A little bit, again, it kind of depends on what you figure to be the most important part of this. Reflection on the bottle. As soon as you put light and you've got glass, you're always going to get some kind of reflection. The question is the reflection dominating too much? If you feel it is, again, one of the things that we talked about was the idea of maybe trying to soften the light with a sheet or a softbox. The other thing I would say here is the light is mainly coming from the front or slightly to one side. There's this kind of general overall light, which is okay, but I think you could be a little bit more inventive, Jim. And I would say next time, because you've got, it's sort of then also kind of sitting up against the card, the kind of blue card or wall behind. The thing with glass, and to be honest, I was hoping for a little bit more of this is glass can be really interesting if you're putting the light through it from different angles. So far, pretty much everybody has done light from the front, or just very slightly off to one side. And I think if you do the light completely from the side, or even the light from behind, get backlight going through glass, you'll end up with some, even if not necessarily a full kind of 180 degrees behind, but sort of slightly off an angle to one side, then the light will refract through the glass. It will refract, if you've got liquid in the glass and it's a clear liquid, then it will refract through the liquid too, and you can get some really beautiful effects. So what I would say is get in and play. Try and move away from a kind of more standard, here are things sitting on a table and I'm just lighting it and taking a photo of it. It's less, I mean, don't get me wrong, Jim, this is, this is a kind of, I suppose in a way it's almost like an identification photo. It kind of is a still life. It tells you what it is. You've got famous grouse, you've got the whiskey. In terms of saying, here's a glass of whiskey, it does what it says on the tin. But I think if you want to kind of create something which is a little bit more kind of eye-grabbing, interesting, creative, start exploring the idea of light from different angles. And I'm noticing this a lot. I mean, I must admit, I think at some point in the next month or so, what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to really start zeroing in on some light, and I'm going to start talking a lot more about the use of side light and backlight, because it's something that I think few people really seem to be grabbing just how much difference it can make to your photography. So anyway, that's me shooting off on a tangent here, but thanks for sending that one in, Jim. Viji says, I do not have a clue about the types of drinks, blended malt, learning something new. Yes, well, the blends when it comes, is whiskey, there's a whole world of whiskey out there, and Scotch. So basically, you have single malts, and then you have blended whiskies. And blends are a blend of different single malts put together. And then the more, there's some very popular whiskies like Grouse and Teachers and Bells, which are all blends. But then there are people who go, I mean, it's a little bit like, I suppose, you can get people who just like general coffee, and you get people who like specific kind of coffees, and then you get coffees which are like single estate coffees, where the coffee beans all come from one particular place, other coffee beans where they blend from different, similarly with wines. You can become a real connoisseur about the whole thing if you want. And whiskey is certainly one of those. Jim says, the light was from the window to the left. Even with the blind down, it was still caught on the glass. But thanks for the tips. Okay, cool. Right, so next up then, we have Sophie. And Sophie sent this one. It says, not drinking any alcohol, just wanted to learn. So again, I think that with this one, Sophie, we're getting off to a start. You've got the glass, you've got some grapes hanging in the glass, so I presume it's a glass of wine. Whether this or it's a glass of olive oil, and you've got olives hanging in the glass against the table. Now, I think there are a couple of things here. I mean, we can tell that we're kind of going with a little bit of window light, because we can actually see the window in the reflection here, which is always a bit of fun. Up against, but it's very close to the wall, so the texture on the wall, this kind of wood chip effect, is kind of coming out quite strongly. There's a sort of yellowish band around the edge here, which makes me think that maybe in the post-processing you've been putting a kind of yellowish vignette on. The whole thing does have a very kind of yellow feel to it. There's also this idea, now here we can see this yellow bit here where the light is refracting through the glass and onto the wall. And that's got potential, except for the fact that the glass is really close to the wall. And this is where I think stepping back from the background, having more distance between the glass and the background, a little bit like with Jim again, I think, more distance between, rather than having things right up against the wall, I think explore the idea of having space, either space, big space behind, which blurs out, or that there's space behind for other lights to reflect back in, or be shot through. So I think it's a good start, Sophie. I think, you get your glass. I like the addition of the fruit. That certainly adds something to it. excuse me. But I think really it's then a case of start playing around with the direction of your light, the distance from the drink to the wall, but allow the fact of that actually that colour coming through, I think has got potential there to start playing with that. The whole point of like glass and clearish liquid is the idea of how light will refract and change as it goes through the liquid and goes through the glass. And I think that's really where the interest can be with this kind of photography. So hope that gives you a couple of ideas. Excuse me. All right. Okay, let's come back to that a sec. Right, yeah, there we go. So now we're on to Jacqui. And Jacqui says, this is my entries for the drink challenge. Not really a story behind the image, except I wanted to practice a bit of still life on glass and drinks. Photography. I suppose in a way you could probably call this one drunk, given, given the fact you got three with the alcohol in it and one that's obviously been drunk. So that could be fun. So this one here then, Jacqui's got a slightly more interesting kind of scratchy background, kind of textured background. That we've got a reflective surface, so there's, you know, we've got some of the reflections happening down here, which is quite interesting, although they've just been kind of chipped off at the edge here. And then we've got the bottle, so everything's kind of in a straight line. So what that does is that gets us to sort of read it. Last week I was talking about different, you know, do you read left to right or right to left? And generally speaking, here in the West, most people tend to read from left to right. So this reads in the fact that we see the bottle first, then we read the three glasses that with the liquid in them, and then we read the glass that's empty and on one side. So I mean, actually, if I open that with Photoshop and we were to image rotation, flip horizontal, it actually reads in a slightly different way. But, you know, interesting nonetheless. But what I would also say with this one, though, Jacqui, is that there feels like there's a lot of space in the back. I don't think you need that amount of space at the top because there's nothing really happening here there. This is kind of much more where the story is happening. But also, you see, you've got these reflections of the glass here, but they're just cut off right on the tip. And I kind of tend to feel that if you're going to crop, you either need to crop in the middle so it doesn't write, or you should crop just over the edge. Now, if I come down here, even with content aware, it's not going to quite make it right because it will just join it up because it doesn't know there's supposed to be an edge there. But the point being that I think it's rather like, I don't know whether you remember, Jacqui, I was talking about the idea of when you're cropping a person, when you're photographing a person, if you don't crop at the ankle, don't crop at the joints, don't crop at the elbows, you know, crop in the middle of the arm or the middle of the leg, or the middle of the shin or the middle of the thigh, but not on the joints. You've got to have space either side of where the cut is, where the brain can either go, you know. So you've got the top of the glass, and the, you know, it's a bit like if you were cropping here. Didn't mean to do that. Where are we? Gonna come back here. If you were cropping the glasses here, you either want to have a space above them, or you want to be cropped through the middle of them. What you don't want is to just kind of miss the tip of them, because that then looks like it's just being cut at the wrong place. And I think given the fact that when with these, you've got the reflections and you've decided to keep the reflections as part of the narrative of this, it's just cropped in just the wrong place. So I would have given that a little bit more room to breathe in there. So you've got a little bit of space underneath it. It's okay for this bottle to then be cropped partially through the middle of it. But then you would also have to watch out that if you were cropping that, you don't end up with just catching the edge of the liquid in it. Again, you want to have completely, you know, it's like if we zoom in on the top here, I've got to stop doing that. Undo, right, I'm just trying to, right, if you were cropping here, you either need to be cropping it above the water, the the line or below. What you don't want is to crop it in the middle. And so similarly, if you were stretching this bottom bit out in order to get the glass, get the top of the glass in, you'd have to be careful about accidentally just cropping that bit in the right place. So it's about getting the balance right. But I think if you can do that, that makes it a bit more interesting. But yeah, certainly I don't think you need quite as much at the top. And also, because this comes down here, this does create quite a large space here where not a lot's happening. Our eyes get drawn over to the texture, and potentially that texture is drawing us away from here. So something to sort of play around with, but yeah, fun nonetheless. So thanks for sending that one in, Jacqui. Right, okay, what else have we got here? Viji says, I like this. Pat says, does whiskey have a shelf life? I have bottles from way back. I don't know. Maybe Google it. I'm not sure. I kind of not. I mean, whiskey alcohol is a preservative. I dare say leave it long enough and eventually it will. But if you've got the corks in, if it's kind of sealed, they will probably last for years. I mean, I'm not a big drinker at all. I mean, I have a couple of single malts which, have been around for years. And, I'll have a slug at New Year and it still tastes good to me. I can hear the banging going again. Yeah, more bikes going past. It may well be okay. Certainly, if it's not been opened, it'll last centuries. So you'll be fine with that one, Pat. April says very balanced photo, and she also believes you can have whiskey for a long time. Jim says whiskey only ages in the barrel before bottling. Some may disappear due to the angel's share. The whole angel share bit is there's a whole, when you go and if you ever do a whiskey distillery tour, they all tell you about that. That basically you have the whiskey in the barrel, and the longer the whiskey is in there, the more eventually evaporates sort of into the wood and then out through. And so that's sometimes called the angel share. What it also means though is if you have a whiskey in the barrel for 12 years, which is, gives you a really long kind of thing, but you lose a certain amount. If you then have a 25-year or 30-year aged whiskey, you've lost a lot more. So not only is the whiskey taking so much longer before you drink the whiskey, but there's a lot less of it, and so consequently the price tends to go through the roof. However, the longer the whiskey tends to be in the barrel, the smoother it becomes, and so the best tasting whiskies tend to be 18 years, 24 years, 30-year-old malts, but they also tend to be hideously expensive. Okay, Jacqui says thanks for the feedback. Excellent. Right, okay. So next on we're going to go to Russ. Russ sent this one in and says, here's my offering for the photographing drinks challenge. I did try to shoot a swirling wine glass, but I haven't managed to perfect that one yet. Now, I can imagine that would be pretty difficult to try and get the timing and everything right. Yeah, a fun one to try, though. This shot was taken using a wood effect foam background boards. Okay, so that's not real wood at the back. It's a foam board with a wood effect on it. Very effective. I wouldn't have known the difference. With natural window light. I'm happy-ish with the result, but I know there's room for improvement. Feel free to offer comment or critique. And settings, you've got an f8 and 1,320th of a second. Sorry, no, 320th of a second, rather. It seems quite a fast shutter speed for something that's sitting still. Having said that, you've got that at f8, but then you're using natural light. And you said about natural window light, and I must admit, I really quite like this reflection here. We can see the sun coming through the window. So it's not just window light, it's actual sunlight, which is casting, and a nice shadow on the wall here. Given the fact, now, a couple of things here. The focal point is right at the front. We've got the front of the glass here, and it seems even at its most sharp, actually on the stopper. We've got all the little kind of grooves here. We've got a lovely bit of refracted light here. I must admit, this stopper, the way the light is kind of cutting through here, even this little kind of burst of glass, it's acting like a prism. I really like this. I tend to feel like almost that this is where the fun part of the story is, Russ. Now, given then that the bottle behind is out of focus, I'm kind of wondering whether you could have almost gone to something like an F11, F13, maybe F16, and had the whole lot in focus and just lowered your shutter speed to compensate, because you've certainly got enough leeway for that. That could have been interesting. There is a thing here. I like the sunlight. I think you've got a shadow here coming in on the left. I presume that's the window shadow. It kind of feels a bit too close in. I think if you just shuffle everything to the right slightly, you don't necessarily need that shadow, and allow a bit more of the shadow to come in around this bottle as well. I think could have worked a little bit better. So maybe have the whole lot sharp, or depending on where you're focusing, if you're focusing in on here, maybe actually have a shallower depth of field, more something like an F4 or even F3.2 or something, and then allow the background to be much more out of focus. A little bit depends on where's the story, where's the key point for this one, Russ? And generally speaking, with something like this, what we're kind of thinking is the key story is, it says in good spirits, we've got the glass, an interesting glass which doesn't have a stem on it, so it's one just for holding in the hand, and this is all quite sharp. This stopper, though, I keep coming back to this stopper, and I think in a way, it's a really interesting stopper, and in some ways for me becomes the dominant part of the photo, and I'm not sure that that's what you set it out to be. If the drink is supposed to be the dominant part of the photo, then what it means is this stopper is kind of competing with it. And if the stopper is supposed to be the main part of the photo, then the drink is kind of competing with it. So I think therein lies a sort of slight problem with it. I like the natural light, I like the wood effect, I like the shadow. There's a lot going for this. So really, I'm kind of upping my critique levels at this. It's not about, make sure it's in focus or the horizon straight. I think there's a lot in this, Russ. But I think I really do like the way the light comes through here, and I think you've essentially almost got like a macro shot or something in here, and then, or maybe adjust it slightly so that the drink itself, along with the bottle, is behind the stopper if you were making a point of photographing the stopper. Otherwise, I think you maybe need to, if you swap these two around and you had the drink in the foreground and you had the stopper slightly behind it, just to make sure that the stopper was acting more as a supporting role to the drink rather than a competing role to the drink. Again, it's one of those things, bit like I was saying to Stacy earlier about when you're talking about the size of the glass. When we're looking at photos and which have more than one object in them, whether it's in these cases a glass and a bottle, or even a glass and a shadow, or a glass and a piece of fruit, the minute we have more than one object in a picture, what's the relationship between these objects? Are they competing or are they complementing? Which one is the dominant one? Which is the one that takes your eye first? And does it take your eye first comfortably? And then you look around at the other aspects, the other pieces, which then should be supporting your prime narrative. Or is your eye getting drawn in more than one direction at the same time? And if it's getting drawn in more than one direction because you've got the glass and you've got the stopper, or you've got the drink and you've got the fruit, and you're kind of getting pulled away, that's when photos don't work quite as well, because the eye isn't sure where it's supposed to be going to first. So anyway, that's a kind of general thing about photography which applies to all things. But certainly, yeah, have a few smug points for that one, Russ, I think. Okay. Where are we? Viji says, I love the glass and the stopper. I have a question though, Kim. Does the label, does it distract or add value? Well, it's the same thing, really. It's just what I'm saying, I think, Viji, which is, and it is writing. The eye will get drawn to writing to see what it's saying. And like, I mean, the thing like with Robert's one, where he's got the whole thing is about writing. It's really becomes it's about the writing becomes the story. The story is if a job's worth doing, is worth doing drunk, and the bottle is there to support that statement. So that's why it kind of looks more like an advertising slogan, as such. So yeah, any bit where there's a bit of writing absolutely becomes a key part of the narrative, and you've then got to decide, does the writing add to the story you're trying to tell? Is the writing about the story you're trying to tell? And then are the other aspects to it supporting or competing with what you're trying to get across? So it's really always worth having these things in mind whenever you're kind of taking a photo of something. Pat says the glass with the odd shape worries me. Is that because it doesn't sit and stand up on its own because it doesn't have the stem patch? Yeah, I know what you mean. I kind of keep thinking, where's the stem? But it's obviously the style of glass and the style of drinking. Right, okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to Viji. And Viji has sent in this one, which I have to say I rather like. This kind of starts to then combine the idea of a little bit of some of the creativity I was hoping, where what we have is then we've got a side light coming in, is going through the liquid, and then we're getting the shadow, but the shadow is also picking up some of that colour, and I really do like that burst of colour through there. Now, it's again looking slightly like it ought to be tilted slightly to the left. Difficult here because we've got some strong... again, it's a little bit like before when, see, if we turn that to sort of straighten this bit, then the shadow ends up kind of a bit too tilted. So maybe a little bit like with Innis, what I might be tempted to do, if I just duplicate that and Control T, is to just pull that one over, this little corner over a little bit, pull that back a touch, just to kind of straighten that edge so that it's... The other thing I would say is I kind of feel like I want a little bit more room to breathe with this, and I would be very tempted to sort of pull that out a little bit more to the right. I've got content aware on, hopefully that will just fill that in. It's done a funny bit of shape here, but if I just kind of do a quick spot, heel, okay, not perfect, but you know what I mean anyway. Just basically what I'm talking about, a little bit more space to the right. And actually, for that matter, maybe you don't need quite as much space to the left, because the edge of the lime or lemon shadow here is about all you need, and a little bit of space just to know it's there. So just that kind of shifting the whole picture slightly to the right, or the perspective slightly to the left, I think works better with that. And Viji says about this, the photo for me, cocktail challenge. Unfortunately, I did not have ice at home due to a major power outage at home. I didn't want further delays. Ice cubes might have added a bit more zing to this. I captured the shadow, which was also blue. The black border on the wall is not the floor, it's the glass table rim. Okay. So that shadow there is actually the shadow of the rim of the table being cast on the wall, which is quite interesting. And I think you're right. I think a little bit of ice in here, like in Mai-Britt's, would have been interesting. You would have got a little bit more texture going through here. It might also have created some interesting kind of shadow shapes in here. Now the blue's quite thick in this, and what I would suggest even is to have something slightly more dilute than this, assuming that if this isn't alcohol, if this is water-based drink of some kind, then actually to have it more dilute and thinner so that you let more light through. And then if you do have ice cubes and what have you, there's more chance of a bit of interesting refraction going on in the shadow side of it. Also, yes, you're right, the other thing with the ice cubes is a bit like with Mai-Britt's. You may well have ended up with a bit more frosting on the side, which would have made the whole thing look a bit cooler as well. And then the other thing as well, I keep doing the wrong bit there, I'm holding the wrong button. Pressing down the wrong thing here, undo that, that's not what I wanted to do. What I'm trying to do here is, there's a guilty fingerprint here, so a bit like Michelle's problem with the dust, you've got a problem here with the glass and the light on the glass is just picking up every single little bit of smudge Um, so, but other than that, Viji, I think certainly smug points for getting a nice bit of colour in the shadow. I think there's huge amounts of potential here, and I would love to see this explored a bit more. I think anybody who's sort of done a bit of setup, play around with light and liquid and colours going through the liquid. What kind of interesting shadows can you get? Sirens going past now. What kind of, can you play around with interesting shadows and refractions and colours in the shadows and colours being reflected on the walls, and play around with the light as well, so that even either you're looking at the shadow that's gone through, or is the light slightly behind and is cutting back through the liquid and the glass as well. So these are the things that I'd really like to see. Okay, so thanks for sending that one in. So smug points for you for getting coloured shadows there, Viji. Right. Okay, Mai-Britt says, nice photo, Viji, like the colours. Jacqui says, beautiful blue. Viji says, yes, I had tried straightening, it wasn't working. Sometimes you just kind of, like I say, it works easier in post-production. April loves the colour in the shadow. Yeah, Viji says, yes, an aerated soft drink. Okay, well then, yeah, maybe if you're not using water, even use lemonade or sparkling water or something like that to kind of thin it out a bit, but also then you can add more bubbles going through. So April says, so we need to use a cloth to touch the glass, no bare hands. Yeah, absolutely. Stacy's enjoying all the shots and the photographs. Viji says, as mentioned, the power outage, I was moving the glass from one place to another. Of course, absolutely, I understand you have all the excuses, and that's true, and that's fair enough and fully understandable. But these things still need to be pointed out. If you want to move the photo from a here's an attempt to here's an amazing photo, then these are the bits we take into consideration. Okay. Oh, and we've got a smiley face from Theanne, so Theanne's here. Okay, right. Okay, so on to the final photo that's been submitted, which is from Nadia. And Nadia, this is an update. This is the second photo. I think she submitted one and then whipped it down and put this one up instead. So in picture take number 2, after getting batteries for my flash. This is my attempt at the challenge, trying coffee, ice and milk flowing through. Coffee and ice and milk flowing through the ice. And I think this is fun. This is really nice, trying to get that notion. So there's a few things I really like about this, Nadia. I like the fact that we can actually see the milk being poured, and we're getting these beautiful patterns coming through. Again, because there's ice in there, we are getting a little bit of condensation on the glass, and we get the light is coming from the side, and we've got a nice little bit of light hitting into the shadow here, a little bit of reflection as well onto the surface. So big potential there. I think I like what you're doing here, Nadia. In terms of improving, I think there's a couple of things. It feels for me a little bit squashed. I quite like to see a little bit more of the drop. It also feels very narrow as well. I didn't mean to open that in photos. I wanted to open that in Photoshop. That's what I was trying to do. And so I kind of almost want to sort of do something a little bit more like this, I think. Need to use the content aware. Hopefully that will fill in. Yeah, now, obviously this hasn't decided, it's not really liking what we're doing at the top. Can I add a little bit more? It's doing some sort of strange thing with... But... I think a bit more of the liquid kind of coming in here. Now, the other thing is, I don't know what your settings were for it seems quite nice and sharp here on the side here, but it seems a bit slightly blurry when it comes to the movement here. So that made me wonder whether it was focused slightly behind the glass. But having said that, it still feels fairly sharp on the front rim and the front of the glass down here. So I think what's actually happening is that you've probably got this on a slightly slower shutter speed. And so essentially, whilst the cream is swirling, you've got these fantastic shapes, except they're not quite as sharp as they could be. So I think you just need a faster shutter speed. And I think a faster shutter speed to really freeze, because there are some beautiful swirls in this, but they just start to go out of focus when we zoom in a little bit. So I think just a slightly faster shutter. I don't know what your shutter speed was with this, Nadia, but if you upped it again, I think a few stops, then that would allow you to really capture sharply the. But also you've got to be careful as well, because you still want a little bit of depth. You don't want to go too shallow a depth of field, because you do want to make sure you're getting a little bit of the depth of that as well. So play around with the settings as well, but I think, and then just that little bit more space around it, I think. I can now getting cheers and stuff going on in the background. So my apologies once again for well, there's nothing I can do about it, but with the touring bike championship, not touring bikes, cycling championship thing going on just immediately outside the window. Anyway, back to this. And so, yeah, I think maybe a little bit more with the pouring, a little bit more space above the glass, a little bit sort of slightly, you know, a little bit more to the side as well, so we're not feeling quite so claustrophobic with it. The alternative is, as always, you either pull out further or you get in closer, and you do something like this, where you kind of come right up and you just concentrate on the top of the glass. You get more of you get a nice kind of sweep coming in, but again, you want to have a fast thing so you can really capture the swirl patterns. So let's flip back here and say, well, but I certainly think you deserve a couple of smug points there. Right, okay, so last couple of comments. Jacqui says, great image, Nadia. Viji says, love the patterns and swirl, look like roses to my eyes. Meg says, beautiful, brilliant photo, fantastic idea. Oh, Nadia says it's 1/200th in the shutter speed. Okay, maybe then try 300th, 320, something like that as a possibility. Though if you're using a flash, obviously there can potentially be problems of syncing it. As such, a lot of flashes only go up to 250th of a second, and if you go above that, then you end up with kind of bars and lines where the light didn't go. But see what you can do with that anyway. Jim says, like the idea, interesting photo. And Viji says, I could barely hear anything. Well, that's good, because I'm very aware of all these bikes shooting past and people banging on the side. Right, okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of this one. Thank you ever so much to everybody who's taken the time to send in an image. Hopefully it's given you some ideas, inspired you, and I really do think that it's worth taking the time to really explore this. If you've got glass and you've got liquid, the way light refracts through it can be really fascinating and amazing. I mean, even just think about the stopper on Russ's photo, where it kind of refracted through like a prism. There's a lot of fun to be had, but you really need to explore side light, backlight, if you're using liquids as well, ice, shadows, there's all sorts of potential in there. But thank you everyone for contributing to that. Little reminder, if you find these podcasts interesting, useful, entertaining, you would like to support them on some level, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, and I can have it either in a glass or a mug. Next week, I haven't fully decided exactly what we're going to do, so I'll work something out, but I'll put something into the Facebook group or let everybody know what's going on sooner or later. But we will have one next Sunday, hopefully. Right, okay, last few comments. April says, we should say thank you everyone again for the birthday wishes. Absolutely, and happy birthday once again, April. And then a few more people saying thank you and good night and what have you. So, well, it's good night over in Asia, good afternoon here in Europe, and good morning still, I think, over in the Americas. Right, thank you very much. See you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.